It started, as most betrayals do, with a soft voice in the dark and a lie told like a secret between friends. Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, was a man of honor. But honor has a way of blinding men in King's Landing, especially when serpents speak like friends. When Ned arrived in the capital, he was already walking on a thin rope. The death of Jon Arryn had shaken him. The crown was drowning in debt. Hobbit was a drunk with the crown too heavy for his shoulders. And the Lannisters, they smelled of blood and secrets. But the moment Littlefinger entered the picture, everything started to rot. Petyr Baelish, known to most as Littlefinger, a man born without power, but obsessed with it. He had loved Catelyn Stark once, or at least he thought he had. But when she married Ned, something cold crept into his heart. Not quite jealousy, not quite hatred, something worse. The kind of feeling that hides behind smiles and waits for revenge, dressed as friendship. The lie began with a dagger, Valyrian steel, elegant, deadly, the same blade that was used to try to kill Bran Stark, who lay broken and unconscious back in Winterfell. The attack had raised too many questions. Who would try to kill a child? Who wanted the Starks to suffer? When Catelyn arrived in King's Landing with the dagger in hand, she went straight to Petyr. She trusted him. She still believed there was something gentle in him, something real. He told her the dagger belonged to Tyrion Lannister, that he lost it in a bet. No proof, no witnesses, just words. And because it came from someone who claimed to love her, she believed it. That lie lit the first fire. Catelyn acted quickly. She had always been strong, protective. And when she saw Tyrion by chance on the King's Road, she had him seized. That one act, arresting the Queen's brother, turned whispers into war drums. It was no longer just tension between two great houses. It became personal. The Lannisters would never forgive such humiliation. Catelyn thought she was protecting her son. In truth, she had been used as a pawn in a much larger game. And Ned, he was walking deeper into a web he didn't even realize was being spun around him. Littlefinger played his part carefully. He offered help, promised access to secrets, made Ned believe he could be trusted. "I loved your wife once," he said softly. "Let me protect her family now." Ned, being the man he was, saw loyalty where there was manipulation. He listened when Littlefinger told him how to investigate Jon Arryn's death, how to follow the trail of bastards and bloodlines that would eventually lead to the truth about Joffrey. But the truth was never the goal, not for Littlefinger. The moment Ned confided in him, told him about the secret that Joffrey wasn't Robert's true son, that Stannis should be king, Littlefinger smiled in the shadows. He pretended to offer support, even told Ned they would secure the City Watch to take the throne peacefully. But it was all a performance. The City Watch wasn't loyal to Ned. They were already bought. And when Robert died, when Ned presented the letter naming him protector of the realm, Littlefinger stepped back and said the words that sealed Ned's fate. "I did warn you not to trust me." That betrayal wasn't just a knife in Ned's back. It was a sword through Catelyn's heart. Word reached her slowly. Her husband arrested for treason. Her daughters trapped in the lion's den. Her sons in Winterfell, one crippled and the other too young to lead. She had lost her grip on the storm, and she didn't even realize who had summoned it. Littlefinger watched it all unfold, and he smiled, not because he hated the Starks, but because their pain was useful. Every broken piece made him stronger. Every death, every scream, every mistake, it pushed him one step closer to the power he craved. He claimed to love Catelyn, but in truth he loved the feeling of owning her tragedy. And that was just the beginning. Catelyn Stark sat still in a chamber far from the chaos of King's Landing, holding a letter that trembled in her hands. The seal had been broken, the ink smudged slightly by the shaking of her fingers. Ned had been taken. Her Ned, the man who had stood tall even in the face of kings, now a prisoner, accused of treason. And the man who had smiled when he gave her the news. Littlefinger. He hadn't said it directly, of course. No, Petyr Baelish always wrapped his betrayals in charm and half-truths. He told her with a sigh, almost as if he regretted it, but there had been a flicker in his eyes, a quiet satisfaction. She saw it just for a moment, before he lowered his gaze and pretended to mourn with her. He said he was trying to help, that Ned had moved too fast, that he hadn't played the game right. But Catelyn's heart knew something was wrong. Not just with the politics, not just with the city, but with him. Peter wasn't the boy she remembered. He wasn't the awkward, soft-spoken ward of her father who once begged for her hand. That boy had been foolish, yes, but kind. This man wore a mask made of smiles and daggers. She had pitied him once, even defended him, when her sister Lisa spoke of his ambitions. But now pity turned to dread. She remembered the last time she saw Peter before Ned's arrest. He'd leaned in too close, touched her hand too long. There had been hunger in his eyes, not just for her, but for something else. Power, control, legacy. He wanted to be remembered, and he didn't care who he had to destroy to get there. And yet, part of her still believed he had meant well or had tried to, that somehow this mess wasn't his doing entirely. Maybe it was Cersei. Maybe the crown. Maybe it was the city itself, corrupting everyone it touched. But that belief crumbled the moment she heard what he'd done. The city watch, the very guards he'd promised to secure for Ned, had turned their blades against him in the throne room. He hadn't just betrayed Ned with words. He'd handed him to the lions, and for what? For the Lannisters. No, Peter didn't care about the Queen or her bastard children. He didn't serve them. He served only himself. Catelyn could feel it now, like a bitter taste in the back of her throat, the truth of who Peter Baelish had become. He had lied about the dagger. He had planted that seed of suspicion, knowing she would act. He had set brother against brother, house against house. Because chaos wasn't a threat to him, it was an opportunity. She stood by the window, staring out into the cold rain, falling over the castle courtyard. Her sons were far away. Bran still silent. Robb just a boy trying to lead men twice his age into war. Sansa and Arya, both taken caught in the coils of the capital. She was losing her family piece by piece. And Peter was at the center of it all. She thought about his strange affection for her, the way he always spoke of her beauty, her kindness, as if she were still the girl he remembered. But that wasn't love. That was possession. He didn't want her heart. He wanted her legacy, her place, her children. He had already tried to whisper his way into Sansa's trust, and she feared he would do worse if given the chance. He had tried to wear Ned's shoes without ever earning them, and for that the North would burn. Catelyn closed her eyes and saw her husband's face, proud, stern, but gentle. He had come to King's Landing to protect the realm, to keep Robert's children safe, to do what was right. And for that, he had been slaughtered by liars in silk robes, betrayed by a man who spoke with honey, but dealt in poison. Littlefinger had not just taken Ned's life. He had taken everything from her. Her faith in old friendships, her belief that even in the South honor could survive. He had destroyed that with a few well-placed lies and a smile. And the worst part, he would never feel guilt. He would convince himself it was all necessary, that he was smarter than them all, that he deserved more because he came from nothing. But Catelyn knew the truth. He didn't love her. He loved the version of her that existed in his twisted memory, a perfect image of a girl who had long since grown into a woman far beyond his reach. He didn't want her happiness. He wanted to own her pain. And with Ned gone, he had finally succeeded. But she swore, with the storm outside echoing the fury in her chest, that she would never let him touch another Stark again. Not her sons, not her daughters, not ever. The capital smelled of secrets. Every corridor, every whispered conversation in the Red Keep, every tilt of a cup or flicker of an eye, they all carried the weight of lies too old to trace and too dangerous to untangle. Ned Stark had walked into it like a man wandering into a swamp, believing he could find solid ground. But in King's Landing nothing was solid. Everything shifted, everything twisted. Even his death had been twisted. It wasn't supposed to end that way. Catelyn knew it. Sansa had written, sobbing, broken, manipulated by the Lannisters, that her father had confessed to treason. But Catelyn knew her husband. Ned Stark wouldn't confess to a crime he didn't commit unless there was a reason, unless it meant saving their daughters. Even in death he had chosen them, and still they killed him. Catelyn had felt the world shatter inside her when the news came. It wasn't a clean kind of pain. It was the kind that burned slowly, crawling through her chest like fire. She didn't cry at first. She couldn't. There was something too raw, too wide in the grief. And when she finally broke, it wasn't in private. It was in front of her son, Robb, when he was named king in the north. And Peter Baelish? He wasn't even there to answer for it. He had vanished from the scene like smoke from a dying candle. The moment Ned's head rolled, Littlefinger disappeared from the chaos he had crafted, moving like a shadow behind war plans and alliances, whispering into ears that were desperate to believe anything that sounded like hope. But his lies lingered. They infected everything. Catelyn had to watch her son take up arms, a boy of 16, because the South had stolen his father. Robb didn't hunger for war, but war had come all the same. The bannermen were furious. The North would no longer bow to kings who spilled Stark blood. And deep down, Catelyn knew this war wasn't just for honor. It was revenge. Revenge for a man who had been too good for this world. And the man who set it in motion, Petter, was nowhere to be seen. She sometimes wondered what he was doing now, sitting in some quiet chamber in the Vale, whispering sweet nothings to her sister Lisa, whose heart was even more tangled around him than her own had ever been. Catelyn felt sick when she thought about it. Lysa had always been fragile, too easily led, too blinded by Peter's carefully planted devotion. And he used that. Of course he did. He used everyone. Catelyn could picture him pretending to love Lysa just enough to keep her obedient, feeding her flattery like sugar to a starving bird. Meanwhile, he'd already planted himself deep inside the politics of the Vale, of the Riverlands, of wherever he could find weakness. He was a man who survived by finding cracks in stronger men's armor, and then splitting them open. Catelyn saw it all now, clearer than ever. He had never meant to help Ned. His every move, from the lie about the dagger to the betrayal in the throne room, had been orchestrated to throw Westeros into chaos. Chaos meant movement, and when powerful families stumbled in confusion, Petter Baelish rose. He had nothing. No great name, no ancient house, no legacy to lean on. And so he built his kingdom out of lies, brick by bloody brick. Catelyn realized now, painfully, that the first stone he laid had been her, the girl he could never have. The love he pretended had been stolen. He used that wound as justification for everything. If he couldn't have her, he would control the world she had once ruled. Her family, her name, her legacy. Catelyn watched Robb speak to his bannerman, his voice firm, despite the youth still clinging to the edges of his words. He was trying to be the man his father had been, strong, just, unwavering. But he didn't know the game the way the South did. He didn't see the daggers hiding behind smiles, the poison in every cup passed with polite fingers. Petter had made sure of that. He had taught the Starks a lesson, not by wisdom, not by war, but by deceit. Catelyn clenched her hands. Her knuckles whitened. There would be no justice in courts, not for Ned, not for her children. The people who played this game didn't fear swords. They feared exposure. And one day she would make sure the world knew exactly who Peter Baelish was. Not a friend, not a noble, not a man of love, but a vulture who feasted on the fall of good men and smiled while doing it. Sansa Stark stood quiet in the halls of the Red Keep, her eyes hollow, her face pale. The castle that once seemed like a golden dream now felt like a prison made of knives. The songs she'd grown up singing, the tales of gallant knights and noble lords, they were dead things now. And the man who helped kill them smiled whenever he passed her. Littlefinger. He wasn't called that in public anymore. Lord Peter Baelish now, Master of Coin, the man who had climbed higher than his birth should have ever allowed. But to Sansa he was something else entirely, the man who betrayed her father and pretended to mourn him. He still spoke to her gently, as if he was her protector, as if he cared. He told her once, in a quiet corridor far from prying ears, that her father's death was a tragedy. "I liked your father," he said with a mock sadness in his eyes. "He was a man of honor. And that's what killed him." Sansa had stared at him, numb. She wanted to scream. She wanted to scratch the truth out of his mouth with her bare hands. But she was learning, slowly, painfully, that survival in the capital required silence, not fury. And he knew that. Of course he did. He fed off fear. He spoke just enough truth to seem trustworthy, always painting himself as a reluctant player in someone else's evil. But Sansa saw the shadows in his eyes now. She remembered her mother's warnings, how Petter once claimed to love Catelyn Stark, and how that love had twisted into something dangerous. Catelyn had told her once that Petyr Baelish was not to be trusted. "He hides knives behind his compliments," she had said. And now Sansa lived in the middle of his lies. He came to her often after Ned's death, offering advice, comfort, even plans. "You're a smart girl," he whispered once, bending low. "Smarter than they know. And one day you'll be stronger than all of them." It sounded like a promise. But to Sansa it felt like a trap. Because she had learned the truth, Littlefinger didn't help people. He used them. He hadn't loved Catelyn. He'd obsessed over her. And now, with Catelyn gone to war and her father dead, he turned his eyes to Sansa, not with lust perhaps, but with that same sick desire to possess what had once been denied to him. It was the same pattern, repeating. Meanwhile, outside the walls of King's Landing, the kingdoms were breaking apart. War had spread like a disease. The riverlands were burning. The North had crowned a king, and still Petyr Baelish walked the halls of power untouched, smiling like none of it mattered. But it did matter. It mattered to the small folk crushed beneath the weight of gold and lies. It mattered to mothers whose sons bled for causes born in shadows. It mattered to Sansa, who knelt each night before her window and prayed for her family, even though the gods had long stopped listening. One night, as the moon hung like a blade in the sky, she stood on the balcony of Maega's holdfast and listened to the quiet footsteps behind her. "You look just like your mother," Petyr said softly. Sansa didn't turn around. Her jaw clenched. Her heart pounded. "She was brave," he continued, "fierce. You have her strength." It was the kind of thing that might have comforted her once. But now it made her feel sick. She realized in that moment that Petyr Baelish wasn't just playing the game. He was winning it. He had no armies, no great banners, and yet he had helped start a war, sent a king to his grave, and betrayed the Warden of the North, all without shedding a single drop of blood himself. He didn't need swords. His weapon was manipulation. He whispered into ears and let others do the dying. And now he was planting his hooks into her, just as he had with her mother. Sansa knew then that if she wasn't careful, she would become the next Stark that Littlefinger broke. So she nodded, smiled slightly, played the role of the sweet, innocent girl. And deep down she made a vow, the same one her mother had once whispered in the dark after Ned's death. One day, this man will pay. Not with war, not with steel, but with the one thing he never saw coming, a truth strong enough to burn through every lie he ever told. The war spread like wildfire across Westeros. Robb Stark won battles, earned victories, and gave hope to the North. But even in triumph, Catelyn felt a storm building behind her eyes. Every time a raven arrived, every time she looked at the map marked with blood and banners, she felt the ghost of her husband standing behind her, silent and unresolved. Because Ned Stark had not died in battle. He had not been slain with honor on the field. He had been betrayed, like a lamb offered to lions. And Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger, still walked free. He wasn't spoken of often among the war councils. His name had faded from the immediate conflict. But Catelyn hadn't forgotten. She couldn't. His betrayal was the match that set fire to her family. Everything that followed, the imprisonment of her daughters, the crowning of Robb, the blood spilled by bannermen, all of it could be traced back to one soft-spoken man with sharp eyes and a dagger-shaped smile. What haunted her most was that she had once defended him. She had sat in rooms and vouched for him, told Ned he could be trusted, told her family that Petyr was just a friend, nothing more. But he had never been a friend, not to her, not to Ned, not to anyone. He was the kind of man who planted a lie like a seed and watered it with grief. Her thoughts often wandered to Lisa, her sister, now locked away in the Eyrie. Petyr had gone to her after Ned's death, married her, whispered his loyalty to her. And Catelyn knew what that meant. Lisa was just another pawn, like all the rest. Catelyn didn't trust her sister anymore. She had seen too much weakness in her, too much need. And where there is need, Littlefinger thrived. He fed off women like Lisa, twisting love into control, wrapping affection around their throats until they mistook suffocation for protection. What frightened Catelyn most was that he had tried to do the same to Sansa. She remembered the letter Robb had received. Sansa writing from the capital, the words formal, polite, strangely empty. It had been ghost-written, Catelyn was sure of it. Or worse, dictated with a blade behind her back. But Littlefinger? He didn't need blades. He used grief as his weapon. He used longing. And he always struck when people were weakest, when their defenses were lowered by pain. She had no illusions anymore. Peter Baelish didn't serve the Lannisters or the Starks or the Vale. He served chaos, because chaos was the ladder, and every rung was a ruined family name. He had climbed high already, and if no one stopped him, he would climb even higher, stepping over the bones of the dead as if they were nothing more than stones in his path. In her quietest moments, Catelyn thought about how differently things might have gone. If Ned hadn't trusted him, if she hadn't carried that dagger to King's Landing, if she had looked into Peter's eyes and seen the truth, instead of the face of a boy who once cried at her door. But regrets were for the weak, and her house could no longer afford weakness. So she kept her grief tucked deep in her chest and focused on her son, the boy trying to be a king. She guided him with a steady hand, even when her heart broke with every sword raised in his name. She reminded him of honor, of patience, of restraint. But in her own heart she made a different vow. She would not die without exposing the man who destroyed them. One day Petter would show his hand again. He couldn't help himself. He was a spider, always spinning a new web, and spiders always crawled too close to the flame eventually. Catelyn would be ready when he did. For now, she would wait, listen, watch. Let him believe he had erased the past, that Ned's death was just a footnote in his rise to power. Let him think Catelyn Stark had been broken by grief, but broken things could still be sharp. And she was no longer a grieving widow. She was the mother of a king. And someday soon, she would make Littlefinger bleed for every lie he ever told. In the cold halls of the Vale, winter crept in early. The wind howled outside the moon door, sharp and hungry, as if it too wanted to throw someone into the abyss. Peter Baelish stood there, hands clasped behind his back, speaking softly to the woman who loved him far too much. Lisa Arryn. She clung to him like a drowning woman to driftwood, and he let her. He whispered love when needed, kissed her hand, spoke of old days when they were young and foolish. But all of it, every word, every glance, was a means to an end. Because by now, Peter Baelish no longer cared about love. He cared about control. And his next target sat quietly by the fire across the room. Sansa Stark. She no longer called herself that. She was Elaine Stone now, his bastard daughter, hidden away in a nest of clouds. But her face still bore the shadow of Catelyn Stark, and that was enough to keep Peter circling. He told himself he was protecting her, that he had saved her from the Lannisters, from pain, from death. But deep down he knew the truth. He wanted to own her. Like her mother before her, Sansa had changed since King's Landing. The girl who once dreamt of golden princes and flowery songs had turned quiet, observant. She rarely raised her voice. She rarely asked questions. She watched, listened. Petter thought that meant he was winning, that she trusted him. But what he didn't see was the steel growing inside her. Every time he placed a hand on her back too gently, every time he whispered about her mother's beauty, or how Sansa would one day be just as powerful, she didn't blush. She didn't smile. She remembered. She remembered her father's death, her mother's pain, her own fear in the Red Keep. And she remembered the face of the man who had helped cause it all. Peter Baelish, the man who lied so easily it sounded like truth. The man who betrayed her family with a smirk and walked away richer for it. The man who now thought he could shape her like clay. Sansa had learned something in King's Landing. People like Peter only respected power. So she played her part, quiet, obedient, grateful. She let him think he was her savior. She let him speak of plans and titles and thrones. But in her mind she was studying him, She watched how he manipulated Lisa, promising her love, keeping her unstable, always dangling affection just out of reach. Sansa knew it was only a matter of time before Lisa became a problem too large to ignore. And then it happened. Lisa found them one morning, Petter standing too close to Sansa, brushing a curl from her face, speaking in that low, affectionate tone he reserved for ghosts of the past. Lisa's scream echoed through the eyrie like a bell tolling doom. Her jealousy was no longer hidden. She accused them both of betrayal, of seduction, of treason against her love. She dragged Sansa to the moon door. Petter watched it all unfold with quiet calculation, like a man deciding whether to sacrifice one piece or another. And when Lisa's hand gripped Sansa's dress and pulled her to the edge, he stepped forward, not to save Sansa, not really, but to correct the board. He told Lisa he had only ever loved one woman. Her eyes filled with tears. A smile touched her trembling lips. "Your sister," he whispered. Then he pushed her. Sansa heard the wind take her scream. It ended with a distant crack far below, and just like that another obstacle was gone. Petter turned to Sansa with soft eyes, as if expecting gratitude. But all she did was stare at him, not with fear but with understanding. She saw him now, fully, a man who climbed chaos like a ladder, kicking the rungs beneath him as he rose. A man who called betrayal strategy and named his greed ambition. And for the first time, he didn't know what she was thinking, because Sansa Stark wasn't a piece on his board anymore. She was learning how to play her own game. The eyrie had grown colder since Lysa's death, but it wasn't just the weather. Something in the air had shifted. A silent change, a crack forming beneath the foundations of Petyr Baelish's careful world. He walked the halls with the same quiet smile, gave the same measured advice to lords and knights, but the balance was no longer perfect, because Sansa was watching him now, and not with awe, not with fear, with calculation. She had seen what he did to Lisa, heard the scream fade into the black sky, felt his hand brush hers afterward like it was a shared secret, a bond, but there was no warmth in it, only ownership. Petter thought he had eliminated a threat, but in truth, he had made a fatal mistake. He believed Sansa would fold under the weight of gratitude, that saving her life, even through murder, would make her loyal. But Sansa Stark had outgrown gratitude. She had learned what it meant to survive people like him, men who used protection as a leash, men who spoke of love only to smother it. And now she was done pretending. She didn't challenge him outright. No, she was smarter than that. Littlefinger had power still, the Vale, the Lords, the name he had built from ash and lies. But she began to speak carefully to the right people, servants, squires, Maester Coleman. She planted questions where once there had only been whispers. Is it true Lord Baelish came from nothing? Wasn't it odd how Lisa died so soon after marrying him? Why is the Lady Sansa never allowed to leave? It was slow, deliberate. Not rebellion, not yet, but doubt. And Petter, for all his cunning, began to feel it. He noticed it in the way the knights addressed her now. Lady Stark, not Elaine, not my lord's daughter. She had stopped correcting them, and they had stopped caring what he thought about it. Power was shifting. And for the first time, Petyr Baelish realized he wasn't the only player left on the board. One night, they stood on the same balcony where Lysa had fallen. The stars above looked like cold eyes, and the wind curled around them like a warning. "You've grown strong, my lady," he said, voice gentle. "Your mother would be proud." Sansa didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She looked him dead in the eyes and asked, "Would she be proud of you?" There was silence, just for a moment. Then Petyr laughed softly like it was a joke, like she was still a child playing at boldness. But his eyes twitched, just slightly, enough for her to see the truth. He was unsettled. He was beginning to see that she wasn't under his thumb anymore, that she never truly had been. Sansa turned from the balcony and walked back inside without waiting for his reply, because she already knew it. Her mother wouldn't have been proud of Petyr Baelish. She would have seen him for what he was, a leech that thrived in shadows, a man who took more than he gave, who betrayed every hand that ever tried to lift him. He had destroyed the man Catelyn loved, lied to her face, twisted her trust into a weapon. And when she died, he turned to her daughter, trying to rewrite the same story with a younger face. But Sansa wasn't Catelyn. She wasn't going to let him rewrite anything. What Peter didn't realize was that the game had already turned against him. The Vale Lords like to speak of honor, of justice, of family. And Sansa, with her quiet strength, her poised grief, her name, was beginning to remind them what real nobility looked like. Baelish still believed he could steer her, that one day he'd place her beside him on a throne carved from lies. But Sansa had no interest in sitting next to him. The only throne she wanted was one he would never reach. The Vale was watching, the North was remembering, and justice, slow, steady, silent, was gathering its weight. Littlefinger thought he had tamed the last Stark girl, but he hadn't tamed her. He had trained her, and the lesson was nearly over. Winterfell was cold again, not just from the snow, but from the weight of history returning to its rightful place. The Stark banners flew once more, the halls echoed with the footsteps of wolves, and the North, beaten but unbroken, had found its voice again. And Peter Baelish had followed Sansa there, thinking he was still the spider at the center of the web. But he was walking into a trap he didn't see, a noose woven from his own lies. Sansa stood taller now, wiser. She didn't speak with the timid caution of the girl he once protected or claimed to. She spoke like someone who had survived the worst the world had to offer and now remembered every face that tried to break her. Littlefinger had convinced himself that she had forgiven him, that she understood the necessity of his betrayals. He whispered to her in the quiet corners of Winterfell, just as he had in the Vale, offering alliances, pointing out enemies, guiding her steps like a hand on a marionette. But Sansa wasn't his puppet anymore. She listened. She smiled when he spoke of loyalty. She nodded when he spoke of ambition. And then, when the moment came, she cut his strings. In the great hall, with Arya at her side and the lords of the North watching, Sansa called him forward. He looked surprised but not afraid. Not yet. He still believed he was in control. "You stand accused of murder," Sansa said, her voice clear, steady. "Treason, conspiracy." He blinked, smiled politely. "Murder?" he repeated, feigning confusion. "Whose?" Sansa's eyes didn't blink. "My Aunt Lisa Arryn, my Uncle John Arryn, and my father, Eddard Stark." And for the first time, truly, Peter Baelish looked afraid, because the lies he thought were buried had come back to life, each one with a blade at his throat. Bran sat quietly near the hearth, blank eyes focused on the past. When he spoke, it was not with emotion, only facts. Cold truths from memories not his own. "You told my father to trust you," Bran said. "And then you led him to his death." Littlefinger stepped back. I was trying to protect Catelyn," he stammered. "Everything I did was for her." "For you, Sansa." Sansa stepped forward, fury restrained behind her calm. "You used my mother," she said. "You betrayed her, lied to her. And when she died, you tried to do the same to me. I loved her." "No," Sansa cut in sharply. "You loved the idea of her. And when she chose someone better, someone decent, you spent your life trying to destroy him." The room fell silent. The weight of truth pressed down like snow on stone. "You gave the dagger to the cutthroat who tried to kill my brother," Sansa said. "Then you blamed it on Tyrion to start a war." "You turned my sister against me," Arya added, her voice low and dangerous. "You pushed Lysa through the moon door," Sansa continued, her words sharp as glass. "You killed Jon Arryn to start chaos. You betrayed Ned Stark. You sold out my family again and again, all while pretending to protect us." His voice cracked as he fell to his knees. "Please, Sansa, I've protected you. I've guided you. I've done everything for you. You were like a daughter to me." "No," Sansa said coldly. "I was never yours. I was your prey." There was no more room for excuses. No more games to play. The web had collapsed, and now the spider was exposed, trembling, small, pitiful. Sansa didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply nodded. Arya stepped forward. The blade was quick, and Peter Baelish, the man who built an empire of whispers, died in silence. Not by war, not by rebellion, but by truth. The truth he spent his life burying. The truth he once used to destroy others. In the end, the lies caught up to him, not with fire, not with fury, but with justice, spoken by the very girl he thought he could control. Sansa watched his body fall. She didn't flinch. She had waited long enough. Ned Stark had died with honor. Catelyn Stark had died with heartbreak. But their daughter lived, and she made sure the man who betrayed them died with shame. The North remembered, and so did she.